It's 11 o'clock.
Hold on. So welcome to the Scaled Down Livestream, where we dive into all aspects about downsizing, aging, and everything in between. I'm your host, Natalie Lewin of Lux Transitions, and each week we bring you expert insights, personal stories, and practical advice to help you navigate this important life transition. So hello everyone, and welcome to today's live stream. We have a very special guest with us today to discuss an important and often challenging topic, gray divorces. Joining us is the esteemed Leanne Townsend. Leanne is a highly respected lawyer who specializes in family law and is regularly interviewed in the media. You might have seen her on CBC television, CP24, CTV News, or heard her on numerous radio stations. Her expertise has also been featured in many divorce magazines. Leanne is not only dedicated professional, but also a mom to two, fitness enthusiast, and travel lover. She brings a wealth of knowledge and a compassionate approach to helping individuals navigating the complexities of divorce later in life. We're thrilled to have her with us today to shed light on the unique aspects of gray divorces and to answer some of our most pressing questions. Welcome, Leanne.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you very much. So before we get into it, how's your summer been going? Any highlights?
It's been going well. The highlight is coming up. My daughter and I are going to Peru on Sunday to hike the Inca Trail. So I've been training for it, and it's definitely going to be the highlight of my summer.
Oh, exciting. So just before the pandemic, I went to Peru.
Oh, wow.
And what an experience that was. So I didn't do that 4-day Inca hike. But I did hike Rainbow Mountain and a few other things. And gosh, it was hard.
Yeah, I'm a little nervous. And we've also signed up to do Rainbow Mountain afterwards, but we're going to see how we feel. If we're like so dead from the 4-day hike, we don't feel up to it, then we're not going to do it. But it kind of feels like when you're there, it'd be a shame not to do it. So
yeah, I would definitely agree. Hopefully you guys feel up to doing it. Yeah, it was great. Great experience. And I want to do that 4-day Inca Trail as well. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm nervous, but excited. And, I hear it's a life-changing experience. So in a positive way. So I'm all for it.
Okay, perfect. So let's jump right in. How does a gray divorce differ from any other divorce in somebody's lifespan?
Yeah, there's a number of ways that gray divorces differ, and they're becoming more and more common as well. First off is usually the child and parenting issues aren't factors so much in a gray divorce, because usually by the time people are later in life, their children are growing and they're adults, so you don't spend as much time or any time usually on those legal issues. But the property and support issues can be more significant, because obviously if people are older, they've had more time to save money and earn money and invest in assets and properties. And so often there's more property and assets involved. And then the income piece is sometimes different, and it can be complicated. Sometimes you have a spouse who's been a stay-at-home parent for 30 years or 25 years. And so, someone in that situation would likely be entitled to indefinite spousal support. And then the other complicating factor is that often people are looking to retire at some point as they've gotten older. And so their big income producing years are behind them if they're looking to retire. And so their income is going to be less. So the spousal support issue can become a little more problematic with the income. And can the person retire, or can they retire early? Do they need to wait until they're 65 or some other age? And the reality of dividing everything, potentially in half at age 60 or at a later stage in life it is hard for people. There's a lot of fear surrounding it because you've spent your life earning and saving, and you've done maybe very well as a family unit. And then at 60 to have that cut in half can be really scary for a lot of people.
Yes, definitely. Especially for the partner that was staying at home for 30 or so years. What do they do, and the impacts on them? Okay.
For sure. Because I think it's a hard position to be in where you're relying on spousal support and you've been out of the workforce for 30 years. So you're not going to be able to necessarily go out and generate income at that point in your life. And you're relying on the other person to be paying spousal support. And so it's a very vulnerable position to have to be in.
Yeah, I can imagine. Okay. And so I guess that's one of the unique challenges people face at this stage in life. What other unique challenges might a couple experience going through a great divorce?
I think some of the other challenges aren't even necessarily directly legal ones. Like, as a couple, they've been together a long time, they have mutual friends. And, when you divorce, sometimes it can become problematic. Like, who gets the friends? Can the people be friends with both of you, or do they need to pick a side, or are they picking a side? And, that can be hard. Adult children can be a challenge in a divorce. They might have very strong opinions about what's going on and whether their parents should be divorcing, or whether one, is at fault for this more than the other. And, and sometimes they can get involved and make things more complicated. And just, things like selling the matrimonial home. If couples have been together for a long time, often they have lived in the same home for a very long time. And there's a lot of emotion, as you would know, surrounding selling a home that, you raised your children in, and you have all these family memories and whatnot. And the children have feelings about that too. So there's a lot of emotion surrounding all of it.
So do you think that a younger couple going through this has less challenges, or are they really just different?
I think they're different, because I think that the level of challenges is more unique to a couple than like what age they are or what stage of life. So I think that the challenges are just different. Like, a younger couple may have challenges surrounding parenting issues. And, a lot of people do fight about what the parenting schedule should be and who gets to make decisions and things like that. So there can sometimes be a lot of disagreement over those issues. And then there's still often property and support issues, even when they're younger. It's just that when you're older, often there's more property, and the support issue is, lifelong, or there's a longer obligation there. So I just say, it's just different challenges.
Okay. So what are some specific considerations when splitting real estate when someone's going through this?
So I guess one of the specific areas that needs to be addressed is the matrimonial home, because the matrimonial home is treated differently than other real estate. And I find like there's a lot of couples who've, invested smart over the years. And so they may have their matrimonial home, but they also have investment properties. So they might own, or they might have a cottage. And so they might own more than one property. And so the matrimonial home has special significance and special rights in that both parties have a right to possession. So you can't just kick the other person out of it, even if title is only in one party's name. And there's the matrimonial home generally can't be excluded from marital property when you're looking at the rules surrounding how property is divided. Whereas if, let's say, the wife owned a condo before they got married and she just held on to that condo, she would be allowed to get an exclusion for what the value of that condo was on the date of marriage. Whereas if it was a matrimonial home, she would not get that exclusion. So there's some differences that way that need to be thought of. And sometimes you can have more than one matrimonial home. Like there are couples that have, their home, say, in the city, and then they have a cottage, and both of those could be considered matrimonial homes. And so they need to be looked at, accordingly. And then, is there a mortgage still? Or if you have rental properties, are there tenants? And anyone who has been a landlord knows that tenants can be problematic sometimes if you want to sell your place or use it, if one party wants to just move in there, to have the tenant vacate the premises. There can be lots of issues surrounding that type of stuff.
And yes, and definitely longer timelines.
Yes, for sure.
Sorry about that. Let me turn this off. Okay. Okay. So how do things get muddled or smoothed out, rather, in terms of retirement counts, pensions? How does that, and does that, let's say, pension. So you touched on that if one party was a stay-at-home partner and that the other partner is retiring, and then so there's less money that would be available for spousal support. How does pensions work in that area?
So pensions are considered a marital asset. So, to give an example, say you had a couple who got married in their 20s, and let's just say the husband was a police officer, which has a pension, and the wife was a stay-at-home mother, and she stayed home, raised, say, 4 children, and, was at home the whole time. And husband worked, from age 20 to, 60, accumulating this pension, paying into it. And then at 60, they're separating. His pension is a marital asset, and it's going to be equalized in the divorce and in the separation. And so actuaries calculate what we call the family law value. So they look at, what is the value of the pension and what was contributed during the course of the marriage, which, if it's been a long, 25 or 30-year marriage, is a lot. It's often, the primary value of the pension. And so that amount, so the other spouse, the wife, would have an entitlement to approximately half of the value, the family law value of that pension. And, that can be a huge hit to someone in that situation. They think they've got this large pension that they've worked towards, and they were planning, maybe to retire a little bit early. And that was always the plan. And then now they're getting separated and divorced, and their pension is essentially being cut in half. And they're going to have a lot less money to live off of in their retirement than they thought. And now maybe they can't even retire early because they're not going to be able to afford to do so to support themselves, let alone provide the spousal support. Okay. So those are really tough issues. And I've had a number of clients recently in situations like that with very large pensions and gray divorces, and they can be devastated. They can feel devastated. Both parties. It's scary for the wife in that situation, but it's also scary for the man. He, in his mind, he's worked. And I'm just using those particular example. It could easily be flipped, that it's the woman who paid for into the pension. But the man who he worked all those years and thought, he had this nest egg to be able to retire on, and suddenly it's half of what he thought it would be. That can be really challenging. And so some couples, I think, just consider staying together, even though they're not happy and they're kind of leading separate lives, but the cost of splitting up is just going to be too much for them to bear. So they decide it's just easier to stay together.
So I was going to ask you that, like, do you see couples staying together because the cost to divorce is so high?
Yes. Yeah, I absolutely do. And I get it. I mean, it's hard because as we get older, I think too, like we want to be able to maintain the standard of living that we've gotten used to. Nobody wants to have a drastic decline in their standard of living when they're, older. So I think some couples, they stay in the matrimonial home, they have separate bedrooms, they essentially lead separate lives. But there's some couples who just can't, they don't want to do that. They want to be happy. They feel like they haven't been happy for a long, long time, and they want to be happy. And if it's going to cost them half their net worth to be happy, then they feel it's worth it. It's really a personal, I don't judge either way, and it's not my job to judge people. But I can understand why people choose either option.
Right. So are there what particular strategies can individuals use to ensure their financial stability if they did choose to still divorce and knowing that it's going to cost so much?
Yeah, I mean, one is to assemble a good team of people. I mean, you want to have a lawyer who is, dealt with significant asset divorces and who's competent, or and you want to have, if you're involved in real estate or selling properties, you obviously want to have a good realtor involved. And also just have like financial advisors and financial planners. I think they're really important for people at that stage because they can help somebody sort out what their financial future is going to look like. A lot of them have software programs where, you can enter in the data and it can project into the future how much money you're going to have, and you can put in your, your expenses and all of that. So I think financial advisors and planners are really crucial in those gray divorces so that people can see, are they going to run out of money? Are they going to be okay? Because at the end of the day, that's the key, right? Like you just want to feel like you're going to be okay. You're not going to run out of money as you get older,
and you don't want to worry about it.
Yeah, you don't want to. Nobody wants to be worrying about that, and most people don't want to end up being like a burden on their children and relying on their children to take care of them. They want to know that they'll be okay. So as you say, having a good financial advisor, financial planner. And accountants can help with that too. But I've just found like a lot of the financial planners and advisors have great software programs that can really help ease somebody's concerns in that type of situation.
Perfect. Okay. So we talked about the financial issues going into a gray divorce, but what are the most common emotional challenges faced by individuals in this position?
I think there's a number of them. I mean, I think one is just the feeling of failure. I think when people get a divorce at any stage, they naturally feel a sense of failure. So there's that element. There's a lot of fear. So there's fears, which we've just been talking about. Fear that you're going to outlive your money. Fear that you don't want to be a burden on your children. Fear of being alone, is another one. I think, again, people at any age, I think, have that fear of being alone. But when you're older, I think that fear is more present because you feel like it's going to be hard. You're just 60 years old. Do you want to go on a dating site? It's harder to. It's especially if you've been married for 25 or 30 years, to have to go out there and put yourself out there in the dating world, which is, I've been there. It's a god awful place at times. And
I was just going to ask, I was like, we should have you back to talk about that aspect of that there is hope. And so congratulations. Wow.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I got engaged this year, so for the viewers, and I met him online, last year at 57. So there is hope. For sure. But, and I know, like, I was with my ex-husband for 12 years. And when I had to go back out there into the dating world, that was really hard for me. So I can only imagine somebody, 25 or 30 years ago, you certainly didn't have online dating. You just met people naturally. You're at the local community center or the local dance hall or, whatever. So I think a lot of people are afraid of being alone, especially as they age, and maybe their health might not, they might have health issues, and they want to know that they have someone who's there to help take care of them, and they'll take care of their partners. So, and fear and isolation, I think, because everyone goes through an adjustment when your children grow older and you become an empty nester, whether you're, together with a partner or single. It's an adjustment. You're used to this busy, noisy house full of children, and you're running around like crazy. And then all of a sudden that's gone. And people can feel really isolated in the best of circumstances. So I think when people are going through a divorce, that's very much a fear that they're just going to be, really isolated and really alone.
Right. Wow. There's a lot to unpack going down this path.
There is.
How can one ensure their legal rights are protected? Obviously, to have a great lawyer, but other than that, are there unknowns that people sometimes, they didn't think about, and so then they don't protect themselves?
There's a lot. I mean, the best way somebody can protect themselves is to have a marriage contract or a cohabitation agreement, that they've had in place, and that's going to outline how assets are divided and how support's going to be dealt with. And, that's the best way that you're going to have clarity on what would happen if your marriage ended. And, those are becoming more and more common. But, a lot of couples that have been together for 25 or 30 years, that many years ago, these types of things weren't as common. So often they don't have them in place. So they are exposed. But, I have a client right now who has been with his spouse for like 20 something years, and she's just presented him with a marriage contract 20 years in. And he's not very happy about it, because he feels like he might have planned his life a little differently and made some different financial decisions if he thought he was going to be presented with this to sign. And so, which I think is a valid point, but those are certainly the best way to protect yourself. Otherwise, I mean, I just think it's always important to be aware of family finances, be aware of money inflows and outflows. What are the, family expenses? What are the income inflows? And, all of that type of information, because then, you're less, if you do end up getting a divorce, you have a sense of what's there, and you don't feel quite as vulnerable that you have no idea what you even have, and is the other person hiding stuff. And that's just always important. And, and make sure that you're aware of debts, because a debt that's from the marriage, that's going to affect the equalization. If your spouse has a debt that occurred while you were married, they're going to be allowed to deduct that from what's considered to be their net family property. And sometimes people, like, their spouse owes tons of money to the CRA and they had no idea. And, that can be really devastating. So it's just really important to be involved in family finances and just be aware of that type of stuff, even if you don't like it or don't feel like you're not knowledgeable about it.
That's pretty scary.
Yeah.
Like a CRA debt or whatever debt it is. And then that affects somebody's financial future.
Yeah.
And even more if they're getting a divorce. Obviously, it would affect them whether they're staying in the marriage or not. But I think it affects them so much more if they're dissolving that marriage.
Yeah, and if they didn't know about it, I mean, that can be a really devastating discovery in the divorce process. You think you're kind of thinking, okay, I think I'm entitled to this much money. These are the assets we have, and then you find out that your spouse has this enormous debt you didn't know about that's going to reduce what they have to pay you.
So you touched on something that I would love to hear more about. You talked about post-nuptials. Is that what I would call it?
The marriage contract?
Yes. Do you see a lot of that?
I do. They're becoming more and more common. They're especially common in, like second marriages. A lot of people, they've already been divorced once. They feel like they gave up everything or half of everything. Then they don't want to do that again. Or they have children. They want to make sure that what they're accumulating goes to their children, and so they want to protect their children. But they're a lot more common. They're less taboo. I think once upon a time, people kind of would feel like, oh, like my spouse doesn't love me if they want me to sign this. And people are more pragmatic now and understand that it's not a reflection of whether someone loves you or not. It's just practical given the divorce rate. And I think it's just advantageous for both people, because then if you were to separate, what's going to happen. You've got that kind of clarity on how things will be divided, and you don't end up having to spend a lot of money on legal fees, arguing about things, and it's just clear.
Right. Okay. Perfect. Do you think, or have you seen in your expertise, do you think that the adult children are as affected or less affected when their parents are going through a divorce at this stage in their life?
That's an interesting question. Some people would think, oh, well, they're adults, like they're going to be less affected. Or you hear people, they want to stay together till their children are adults because they think it's going to affect them less. But from what I've seen, it does affect them a lot. And I don't know whether it affects them more or the same, but certainly at least the same. Because they've had this childhood where their parents are together, and they maybe have this image of their parents. Sometimes with the adult children, they kind of have the mindset, they should have divorced a long time ago. I don't know why they stayed together this long. That's often a common feeling too. But
sorry to interrupt you. It's funny that, as parents, we think that we're doing something for our kids. But in actuality, it would have been better had we not waited.
Yeah. I mean, the research shows that the issue is the level of conflict. So if you stay together, but there's constant conflict in the home, that's really bad and really hard on children. If you split up and it's high conflict, that's also very hard on children. But if you can split up amicably, so say there is conflict and it's hurting the children, so you split up and you do it amicably, your children are going to be fine. But if you stay together and they're exposed to this constant fighting, and whether your children are adults or young, it's really important not to involve them in the divorce. Like, that's a mistake sometimes you see. Well, you see it at all ages, but especially with the adult children, you'll see a parent who confides more in the adult children what's going on, or uses the oldest child like an emotional confidant or source of emotional support, and they shouldn't be doing that. At the end of the day, they're still the children of the marriage. They deserve to not be involved in their parents' divorce, and to have a good relationship with both their parents, and not be asked to pick sides or think worse of sometimes if there's like an affair or something, when the parent who was cheated on might want the children to really stick it to the spouse who was the cheater, and like that's just not fair to them, because they weren't cheated on. Like, they're the children, and whatever your child's age is, they should be kept out of all of the family law issues.
Yes, agreed. So I want to touch on this. I didn't ask before, we kind of danced around it, but you spoke about benefits. We spoke about specifically pension, but what happens with life insurance? And what also happens if you're going through this process and somebody is sick and needs care? Is that something that's dealt with in the divorce proceedings?
Yes, it can be. So generally, life insurance in the divorce process is used as a way to secure someone's support obligation. So if you have a spousal support or child support obligation to your spouse, you're going to need to have a life insurance policy in place that's of sufficient value to cover whatever amount of support you are having to pay, what your obligation is, so that if God forbid you die, your spouse would get that money, since they're not going to get it, through support if something happens to you. So that's generally the life insurance piece. And then benefits can be interesting because most policies, if someone's divorced, they can't have their spouse on their benefits. And so there are some couples that just don't divorce. You can be separated and have your separation agreement and or court order, even, because you're separated, and all of your issues resolved. But the agreement is that you're not going to divorce, and the spouse with the benefits will keep the other spouse on his or her benefits so that they can have, their pharmaceuticals covered and their, whatever other, dental or whatever other things they may need that are part of the benefits plan.
Okay. Interesting. But I guess that also goes back to that affordability piece. It's so expensive for some to divorce that they end up staying married and just don't divorce to keep costs down. Likewise, health benefits.
For sure. There's, and right now, because I think people are hurting a little more than they might have a few years ago. I from what I've read, like, more people are staying together right now just because they feel like they can't afford to split up. It's too expensive. And then with the real estate market being, down from the high of in early 2022, people don't want to sell, their property. And, one of the things I didn't touch upon when I was talking about real estate and properties is, what comes up as a common issue with the matrimonial home is, can one spouse afford to buy the other out, or do they have to sell it? And that can sometimes be a challenge if one party wants to buy the other out, but they can't agree on, what they've got one real estate agent or appraiser saying it's worth this, and the other spouse has a real estate agent or appraiser saying it's worth this, and they can't agree on the price. Or sometimes some people they're so upset at their spouse, they'd rather, do anything than sell to them. So then it has to go on the open market. And then the reality is some people just can't afford to buy their spouse out. I find there's a lot of situations where someone really, really wants to hang on to the matrimonial home, but they're not going to have the cash flow to maintain it. And so it's just not a realistic option for them, mid to long term. And they don't, they're being too emotional and sentimental about all the memories of raising their children there. And they don't want to think about that. But, it can be a reality that carrying a bigger house or a more expensive house and all the carrying costs, if they don't have the cash flow, then they're going to run into problems.
Wow. And especially at this stage in the game, because if we're thinking somebody's like in their 60s and maybe they could afford, based on the assets, to buy the person out, but what does the maintenance look like? And then if you have to go back out into the workforce, like, do you want to do that? Is that feasible?
Yeah. And sometimes, like, if there's still a mortgage, some people can't get a mortgage just in their own name. Like, it worked when they were both on the mortgage, but, especially if it was someone who was a stay-at-home mom, that she may not be able to get a mortgage in her own name. And so that can present a problem as well.
Wow. Okay. Well, this was great. Is there anything else that you think people should know or may want to know about divorcing over 60?
I mean, I think just the main thing is that I think knowledge is power. So if you're in a relationship and you're married and you're thinking, you're not happy, so you're considering separation or divorce, have a consultation with a lawyer. Some lawyers offer free consultations. I offer a reduced rate for my consultations. There's different formats for it, but go spend for the hour and have your list of questions and hear it from a lawyer. I mean, we live in a society where everyone Googles everything, and Google can be helpful to give some, I think, general information in a lot of areas. But just like if you had some major illness, like, you're going to want a doctor to diagnose it and recommend the treatment, not just get it from Google. And it's the same thing. Like, yes, legal lawyers can be expensive, but say you pay $300 for an hour of a lawyer's time to get a whole bunch of questions answered. And in my view, that's money well spent. And so I think it's, rather than assuming or wondering or talking to friends and family who are not lawyers and give you faulty information, just spend the money, have a consultation, and get some clarity on some of the issues.
Perfect. So if people want to get a hold of you to have a consultation, where can they find you?
The best place is my website, which is www.townsendfamilylaw.ca. All my contact information is there. My email is leanne@townsendfamilylaw.ca, and the phone number for my firm is 416-860-5968. So any of those ways.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Leanne, for joining us today. As you all know, I'm Natalie Lewin of Lux Transitions, a realtor with Keller Williams Portfolio. I specialize in helping adults 65 plus scale down to their next chapter. I'm passionate about helping and educating people on this important piece of their journey. So if you or someone you know is considering a transition, please DM me to schedule a discovery call. Remember, life is beautiful, and I'm here to help you make the most of it. Tune in next week, same time, same place. We will be speaking with Detective David Kofi and how to avoid elder scams. Take care until next time.